Today on the InCamera podcast, I'm sitting with John Michael McGrath, or JMM as he's commonly known, writer, journalist, podcaster, best known for his work at TVO. I'm sure many listening are used to John being with the seasoned Steve Pakin on the On Poly podcast. I'll try to do my best to not disappoint audiences. JMM, welcome to the InCamera podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So for anyone who's watching, we're a little more casual today because I wanted to do one of the traditions that you do on the On Poly podcast, which is wear, a graphic T-shirt and sort of talk about it. And why don't you tell me what you're wearing today?
So this is just from the, I would say earlier this year, the elbows up moment with, the re-election of Donald Trump. And this is a Star Wars emblem, the emblem of the Rebel Alliance, stylized with the Canadian maple leaf flag. So I like it as a symbol of resistance to the current jurisdiction south of us.
Yeah, and for anyone listening, it says join the resistance. Yes. I'm wearing a T-shirt that says make it so. I am a Trekkie. I'm a huge fan of Star Trek. Even the current version, I've been consuming it quite a bit.
I've really been enjoying Strange New Worlds.
Strange New Worlds is amazing, and fun fact, it's filmed in Mississauga.
Ah, okay.
The bridge is in Mississauga. I also like the make it so. My wife actually got me this shirt for a birthday or Christmas a few years ago. But it reminds me a little bit of like it's the Trek version of Get It Done.
Yes.
Right? Yes. And, Doug Ford has this Get It Done sort of moniker that he's given himself, which, works or doesn't, but I guess is part of his brand. I just wanted to reflect on a moment from a few years ago when Andrew Scheer was leader of the Conservative Party federally. I don't know if you remember this, because I know you follow federal politics as well, and then you're also following Star Trek. He wore a costume for Halloween while he was trick-or-treating with his kids. I thought this was an interesting moment, being a fan of Star Trek and a fan of politics, seeing the crossover, and thinking about the political decision he made to the uniform that he wore. And I'll tell you what he wore. Okay. He wore a gold uniform, like from the TNG era, the Next Generation era. I'm sorry, I'm nerding out way too much on this right now. But, and I thought that was an interesting choice. And he was like a lieutenant.
Yeah.
And I was like, you're trying to be prime minister of the country. Why wouldn't you make yourself a captain or an admiral?
Why wouldn't you be wearing red?
Maybe he didn't want to wear red because it was liberal.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what I was thinking. But then why not just wear blue then?
If you're wearing blue, then you're the nerdy science officer, and maybe...
Yeah, but it just felt like an interesting choice to sort of demote yourself.
Yes. Yes.
To not be a leader and to also not be a...
Yeah, you're right.
Higher-ranking
that
official.
is a very interesting choice. I have to wonder how many meetings were held.
To decide on that. But anyway, I'm done nerding out on Star Trek. I won't mention it
now.
For now. I did want to go into your career a bit because you've covered politics for most of your career. And before you were at TVO, you were at Queen's Park Briefing, which I think at the time was a subsidiary of
it was
the
a Star publication. Yeah.
And I remember subscribing to it because I think I was at Queen's Park almost at roughly the same time that you were a reporter there. Deciding to become a journalist and then wanting to cover municipal and provincial government and political landscape, sort of how did that come to be, and why was that your interest?
So let me start at the start. I graduated from journalism school in 2009, what was then Ryerson University is now TMU, and started looking for work. And early 2010, I got the opportunity to write for Toronto Life's website, and they asked me basically if I could do short blog posts every day about current affairs, about including municipal politics, which I did not know a lot about at the time, but I was willing to learn quickly. And I want to say 3 or 4 weeks after I started, the eventually successful candidate Rob Ford announced he was running for mayor. And in one sense, you could just say my entire career has just been like riding the roller coaster of
Fords.
Rob and now Doug Ford and covering their careers. So I spent another while writing for Toronto Life. Then there was a website that is no longer in existence called Open File that I worked for a bit. As is the way with startups, it came to an end. But, I spent probably 3 years, I guess, covering Toronto City Council really intensely. moved on to covering Queen's Park in 2013 with QP Briefing. And then after about 18 months with QP Briefing, moved on to TVO. And so it's been it's been a bit of a wild ride. I've been at TVO now for a decade, which back when I was starting out, I had no sense a job could last that long. But I have always I've enjoyed the detail. Certainly coming from municipal politics, I've really enjoyed the detail that you were able to work into journalism. Explaining to people like why political decisions, policy decisions, why they matter, and taking something as mundane and on the face of it like dry as a why is the city tearing up a road to put a wider sewer in? Well, right. It turns out it's because there's been a dozen applications for high density towers there, and they need new sewer capacity, that kind of thing. So I really I enjoy that kind of journalism. And then sometimes you've got to just cover the straight, like the more, I don't know, sideshow aspect of politics, because sometimes that's what's important too. And I've been lucky enough to do both.
Yeah, the fire of the day, so to speak.
Yeah.
One thing I really like about TVO coverage, because you do have that educational mandate.
Yes.
Right. You're funded by the Ministry of Education.
Yes.
And you have programming that's dedicated to that, and so it is less of the gotcha and more of the, hey, there's a story about this gotcha because this is the context in which they're having this debate right now, which is great, and it seems less sort of daily partisan battles.
Yeah, and so I've had multiple editors at TVO, and one of the really consistent through line, and there are obviously always going to be exceptions to this, but one of the consistent through lines that we've always tried to follow is, we are under no pressure to match the daily news, right? If the Star, the Globe, the Sun, CP24, CTV, and I'm by no means am I disrespecting my colleagues who do incredibly valuable work, but if they are all covering something, then it's covered, and like there's simply no need for TVO to jump in. Now, if it's big and important enough, then and I think I have something novel to add, then yes, I will. But we have no pressure to meet the daily news in the same way. And part of that is the educational mandate. Part of that is that we are just a smaller public broadcaster. And something that your audience might not realize, might not know, is that even within TVO, the current affairs side that I work for is a relatively small part of the overall operation. Really is an agency of the provincial government that is focused primarily on its educational mission, and the journalism that I do is part of that. But the current affairs and documentary side is just one part of a larger agency that really is mission driven on education.
Especially with Steve's content a lot, and lately it almost seems as if he's a steward of Ontario history, and kind of takes a personal responsibility to make sure people know, this anniversary or that anniversary, and who did what, right? I love when he gets into Oliver Mowat or
yes,
Premier McDonald, like whatever it is.
I have asked him if he has like a spreadsheet that he is running, with all of the various birth dates and death dates and everything. And no, this is all off the dome. If you ever see him like, on our podcast talking about, this week happens to be the anniversary. Like he might have Googled that just to confirm an intuition he has, but like he just knows stuff. I marvel at the machinery in between his ears.
Well, and there's all the history around Hamilton too. He's like, he always wants to make a Hamilton reference, and I know he wrote a book about Bill Davis, which is why he's able to talk about Bill Davis quite a bit, and I think it probably coincided with his career rise when he was covering Bill Davis as well. I have a Bill Davis story that I've been meaning to tell him next time I see him, but I was able to visit him. I was at his house with an artist because I was working for Sheridan College at the time, and the campus in Brampton is named after the Honorable William Davis. And we realized that for the 50th anniversary of the college system, we wanted to celebrate him as the premier or Minister of Education at the time, but also as the namesake for the college campus. That there wasn't a real sort of dedication to him. And at Hazel McCallion campus here in Mississauga, we have a bust of Hazel, and there's actually several busts of Hazel around Mississauga, but there wasn't one for Bill Davis. So I commissioned one, and we got to go to his house and had a lovely conversation for about an hour and a half about his time in politics. And he said to me, because he knew I had run for the Liberal Party, and he was like, "You're a bright young man, a little politically misguided, but
Yes.
continue your journey, and maybe you'll get educated."
Yeah. My one and only interaction with Bill Davis was when I was just starting out, and I took a freelance commission to write something for the Globe and Mail, and they wanted something about the changing nature of conservative politics, and Rob Ford was sort of the icon of going from a, let's say, more genteel conservative politics under Bill Davis to the more populist swing. And my father was also a Queen's Park journalist for many years, and so when I reached out to Bill Davis's office, I think he returned the phone call as a courtesy to my father, but he called me, and it was basically 5 minutes of me trying to get him to answer a question like in any way possible, and every time, it did not matter how I phrased the question, how many different iterations I tried to wording it, he had returned the call out of courtesy, but he was not going to answer any questions. And it was, I think Stephen Colbert once used the phrase "boxing a glacier." That was basically my one and only experience with Bill Davis.
That's fun. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about media and really have you here as well, because not to say that what TVO covers is niche, but it's not the day-to-day grind, right? I think the perspective of a municipality that's outside of Toronto, like Mississauga, for a city that has 750, almost 800,000 people, we have no direct media outlets that service Mississauga. We used to have a daily newspaper, then it became a bi-weekly newspaper, then it became an online article, right? And so it feels like there's not enough. There's no service to the community in terms of getting the news, understanding what's happening other than what they see on social. I just kind of wanted to get your perspective on how on what the challenges are and how a municipality like Mississauga can enter into the media more.
Well, let me start by telling you a bit of a story, because this is not a problem that is at all unique to Mississauga. Even I have heard provincial ministers. There was a really bizarre experience near the end of the Wynne government where a minister gathered reporters to do what they had called a technical briefing, but it very rapidly became clear that there were no non-political staff involved, that we were getting political spin from the minister.
Right.
And we started looking at each other going what is going on here? What is happening? And eventually minister sort of hems and haws in it and acknowledges that we were all called together because the government was having a hard time. They were in a fight of sorts with then Mayor John Tory, and the government of Ontario was feeling like it was having a hard time getting its version of the facts out, and because in a fight between the Premier of Ontario and the Mayor of Toronto, the Toronto City Hall press corps has a more direct line and was more able to get the mayor's message out than the government of Ontario's.
Right.
So all of this is just to say that this is not a unique problem for Mississauga, right? The media industry has, shrunk and consolidated, and more is resident in the city of Toronto, right? Toronto-based reporters answering to Toronto-based editors, and quite aside from the issue of even if there were a print daily newspaper in Mississauga, given the structure of the industry today, I kind of feel like your reporters in Mississauga would be answering to a Toronto-based editor. Right. And I think that's a problem for, places that want to, just for basic, getting the information out, right? Getting the important information out, right? People in Mississauga are going to have a better idea of what is important to readers in Mississauga. But I think, one of the reasons why we have public broadcasters in this country is the idea that we are best suited to telling our own stories.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of, what can be done, I mean, gosh, like, as I say, I graduated in 2009, and it was the teeth of the recession of the global financial crisis, and I said to myself, well, it's rough now, but the journalism industry will sort itself out in about 4 or 5 years, and I'm still waiting, man.
Well, I mean, that's also one of the reasons we're even here,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I did my master's in digital media communications, and we essentially decided and came to the conclusion that we had to create our own content and come up with our own messaging and be our own outlet. Otherwise, there were no ways for us to communicate with residents.
No, and I think
challenge.
that's smart.
Yeah.
And I think, that is, more broadly speaking here, right? I think there's a lot of disenchantment with, frankly, just even the idea of independent media. There's a lot of hostility to traditional media, certainly, and what you are seeing a lot more of, including, I think particularly on YouTube and in the ecology of podcasts generally, a lot of people are just like, they've decided, why would we talk to reporters? Let's just tell our own stories. And the barrier to entry for obviously, like, look at our current surroundings, right?
Yeah.
The barrier to entry for producing, high quality audio and video is just relatively low these days, and it's really easy to get things up and running, and then you start publishing to YouTube.
Almost too easy to, in some cases.
Well, yeah.
I mean, if you're having opinion makers who are just going out there for clicks, right? And then you have a lot of this misinformation, sometimes disinformation, that's intentionally trying to sway people. And then with the regulations that we had with, I think it was Bill C-5, where now Facebook's taken a certain position and they're not publishing mainstream content anymore. And then now you're leaving.
TVO got pulled from Facebook. Yeah,
and you're leaving these public spaces digitally to other less reputable organizations, which is very complicated.
And this also goes to the perennial complaints from readers about anything that gets paywalled, right? And it's like, well, the facts cost money, the lies are free, right? And that is a real problem for the media.
Well, and in some municipalities, it's become a real concern. I think there's a councillor in, I want to say Ajax, or is it Pickering?
Thinking Lisa
Pickering.
Robinson?
Yes.
Pickering, yes.
And there is a coalition of people who sort of share in that disinformation world that now have a more political avenue in which to continue to espouse their misinformation, which is very problematic for a municipality like that doesn't have a lot of their own media that could counter that.
Yeah, and that particular case has now risen to the level where it's getting a lot of attention from I've written about Lisa Robinson at TVO. It's getting a lot of attention from other outlets. I think last year she did a press conference in the National Press Gallery in Ottawa, and so like some Ottawa-based reporters were like, "What the heck is going on here? What is this about?" So she's managed to get attention, certainly.
Well, and the province is paying attention on some level. I think they've changed some of the codes of conduct and how municipalities are going to, or councils
bringing
are
in
going
legislation to do that. We will see how it actually plays out, because first they pass the legislation, then they have to pass regulations.
Yeah. The devil's in the details.
Yeah, I've written about this at TVO, and I'm pretty skeptical that it will have that it will make a material change in people's conduct, and I'm kind of cynical about this. I think it is not intended to have any real change, certainly not before the next municipal elections.
Well, and you've been to AMO a bunch,
Yes.
And I've gone the last several years since I've been elected, and it always is an issue at the Bear Pit. People always bring it up, and the government has been paying lip service to, we're going to do something about it, and so it'd be really disappointing if whatever comes out here is going to be insufficient, but it does seem like that's the way it's going. Specifically in this case, here in Mississauga, we had, just before the last election, the person who sat in my chair, Karen Rass, was getting harassed by another councillor, was caught keying her car for, I think, 6 or 7 times over the course of a year. We even have footage of it, refused to resign, and, filed integrity commissioner complaints. The first integrity commissioner was like, meh.
Yeah.
It's fine. He'll pay for the damages, and you're like, this is a criminal thing. And that's also when we learned, like counselors learned, that we weren't employees.
Yes.
That we're essentially board members of
and you don't have
a
the
corporation.
protections of
No.
employee rights legislation.
Yeah, the Employment Standards Act does not apply to us. But that makes it trickier too, because you're trying to find more good people to come into politics, and they see cases like this, and they see what certain councils are putting up with, and they see what gets thrown at them online, and you kind of get to, well, why do you really want to do this? Like, what's the motivation?
Yeah, and it is, it really is a problem that I as I say, I'm kind of cynical about this latest piece of legislation from the government. I don't expect it to do much, but it is something that I hope they can, maybe take seriously, at a second crack at this issue, or a future government is going to have to, because, it is driving good people out of politics. It is, keeping good people from even considering it.
Yeah.
One of my, to get a bit meta here, but we don't think enough provincially or municipally about the structures that lead to good government. And, I think there is a desire, and I'm going to pick proportional representation here as one example of, there are people who there are absolutely sincere good faith reasons to want different types of electoral reform, but there are people who will say, well, I don't want proportional representation because it would lead to chaotic minority governments.
Yeah.
And I think to myself, well, okay, how many elections have we had since, let's say, 2000? How many governments have we had? We've had a lot of minority governments federally.
Yeah.
And, have we had more or less chaos than other jurisdictions with more proportional systems? And, quite aside from the fireworks or the clown show, are we getting the results from government that we want? And in many cases, municipally, I would say, no, we are not. And certainly I'm sympathetic to electoral reform ideas provincially and federally for that same reason.
Yeah, I've been on top of that for a long time, too, thinking, I was supportive of, I think it was 2008, where we had a referendum.
Yeah, 07.
Unfortunately, it didn't go through. It was actually... I went to Queen's for my undergrad, and my professor of politics was the academic advisor for that program, which was a citizen-based recommendation. This is how we can have mixed member proportional. Yeah. So we'll have a list, but then people will still be responsible by having directly elected representatives for their constituencies, which I thought was a good mix and a good compromise. But it seems like we're not super willing to entertain new electoral reform ideas. Municipally, we even toyed with the idea of ranked ballots for a little while, and I think London Kingston was thinking about it.
One person for whom you can say the ranked ballot was unquestionably the reason they won. And Ariel Kayabaga, I believe, who's now an MP for that area, and then the Ford government very early in its tenure eliminated that possibility.
And I think Kingston was looking into it, but I've recently heard some calls for municipalities to think about whether or not they should have political parties.
Yes.
Which I think is an interesting proposition. Initially,
I'm on the record as pro.
Yeah. And, my thoughts have evolved on this, because initially I was like, I don't know, we do work in a pretty collaborative way right now. And it's kind of ad hoc. It's issue to issue, where we can have different coalitions. But we're one out of 444 municipalities. Yeah. So other municipalities might not work the same way. But then I also was sort of told the accountability piece to it, which I thought was really interesting, is that if you have political parties, not in the sense of liberal, conservative, or Democrat, but like the way they do in British Columbia, where they have, the ABC party or whatever it is, where you could say, this is the platform that we want to run on collectively. This is the mandate that we would like. And this is what we're trying to do. And you could hold them more accountable if they fail to do that, by sort of saying, well, they were a member of the ABC party and they didn't lower taxes like they said they would, or they didn't add the bike lanes like they said they would. Yeah. So now I'm going to vote for somebody else. Versus this sort of incumbency shield that you have. I mean, Mississauga is a great example. In 51 years, only 6 incumbents have ever lost.
Yeah.
And one of them keyed the car of another person.
So, I started advocating for political parties when I was watching the City of Toronto, where, I mean, the first election I covered professionally was 2010, and that was also the first election where a majority of councillors had been elected after the amalgamation in 1997, right? So for 13 years, we'd still been governed by people whose political careers had started in an era that was no longer relevant, if I could just be blunt about it. And, you know, to go back to, like, you know, we don't think enough about institutions of good government, but, like, if you don't have competitive elections, right, people are getting reelected on, I'm going to put this politely, on a basis other than merit.
Yeah.
And, you know, and like, it's not just Toronto. I'm certain it's not just Mississauga, right? Every election cycle, you know, there are towns all over the north where mayors get acclaimed.
Yeah,
There is simply no challenger. And, like, in smaller municipalities, that system might work, right?
Hazel was acclaimed, I think, 3 times.
Right. And, you know, and Mississauga isn't even a smaller municipality anymore. But I think when you reach a certain size and complexity, certainly I think Mississauga is there now. City of Toronto, you know, has been there certainly, you know, arguably since the 1980s. You cannot simply rely on personalities anymore. Like, you know, and certainly since amalgamation, right, the City of Toronto is simply too large for a non-partisan form of government to deliver the best results. So yeah, I'm kind of ambivalent about whether you simply import the Liberal, Conservative, and NDP party brands, or whether you insist on some kind of you know, degree of separation. You know, you mentioned BC, Montreal, another one where you have local parties that are not formally tied in
They have
with
like over 100 seats in the Montreal Council, which is wild.
Yeah,
It's like a legislature.
Yeah, well, and you know, a former city councillor used to say, like, if the City of Toronto held as many seats as it did prior to amalgamation, there would be almost 100 elected councillors. But you know, it wasn't just the amalgamation of 6 cities into one. There was a massive contraction of the number of elected councillors. And then, of course, in 2018, Premier Ford cut that council further in half. So
I kind of want to get into this because obviously you've covered the Fords, you've covered municipal politics and provincial politics. This Premier in particular seems to have, I almost want to call it an obsession with municipalities. Yeah. And I want to understand why, because, and I hate the phrase, we're creatures of the province.
Yes.
People say that all the time, but it feels like we're giving too much license to the province to sort of meddle in what was essentially a mandate of municipalities to deliver certain services, while also controlling all the levers in terms of policy, while also controlling all the levers in terms of funding, and giving us a mandate that is sometimes unmeetable.
Yes.
Right. And I kind of said this in an interview the other day. I wish the Premier didn't create policy based on his commute to work, especially around bike lanes and speed cameras. But I mean, you've obviously followed him and covered him for quite a while. What do you think? Where does the root of this sort of obsession with municipalities?
Well, I mean, some of it is simply that's where he came from, right? Yeah. Like, you know, we've already referred to his late brother, the mayor, but during those same 4 years, he was serving as a city councillor on Toronto City Council. He was clearly entertaining the idea of running for mayor again in 2018 before the position of PC party leader opened up early that year. You know, so it's very much a level of politics that he is familiar with, and he seems to have a real instinctive grasp of local politics in a way that I you know, as much as, you know, clearly he's been successful politically at the provincial level for 7 years, but I don't think he has an intuitive grasp of things like healthcare or education policy in the same way that he really seems to have a fondness for and an intuition about things like, you know, the proper use of roads and, you know, more locally focused matters. And it's frustrating because, there are clearly areas where I would agree that traditional areas of municipal competence have now become areas where the province has to step in. And I would say like housing policy is one where I've been on the record for many years saying that, the housing crisis has become so severe that deferring to municipal planning policies simply cannot work anymore. And the premier does not agree with that, right? The premier gives still, and I know, not every municipal council is happy, but the premier, look at what the Minister of Municipal Affairs is saying right now about how they are not going to force municipalities to lower development charges. They're quite happy when Mississauga does,
which
on
I
its
wish
own
they
volition.
did, because we took the lead on that,
Yeah.
and we expected everyone else or the province to sort
Yeah.
of say, yeah, you got to follow suit.
But they are not going to do that, right? So that's like one area where I would say like you could absolutely argue in good faith that municipalities cannot be allowed that same sort of freedom of action, that the province has to step in. But instead, what we get is a provincial government that is micromanaging the correct placement of bike lanes on Toronto's streets. And yeah, okay, like congestion in the GTA is a real economic issue. I think at some points people overstate, like we give way too much credence to, frankly, crazy estimates about what the economic costs are, because we're never going to solve, like,
No.
we're never going to perfectly solve congestion
Yeah.
so that we reduce that economic cost to zero, right? The question is like, best case scenario, traffic congestion is always going to cost billions of dollars by the metrics we use these things, right? Bike lanes are not going to change that at all. They are going to make my life more risky. They are going to make the lives of other cyclists risky. The Premier's decision to remove speed cameras from school zones is going to make the lives of school children riskier. That's, some of that is the nature of government, right? Like the government, every decision government makes carries the potential of having a body count, right? We learned this during COVID. But a lot of these decisions, I think, ought to be, frankly, beneath the notice of a premier, right? Like there are much larger, much bigger problems that the province could be taking a hand in solving. And but this, for whatever reason, this premier's passion is stuff like speed cameras and bike lanes.
It's funny because he says to the feds, especially whenever they mingle in municipal or provincial affairs, to stay in their lane.
Yes.
And he's constantly in our lane.
And also challenging federal policies, yeah.
But 2/3 of what the provincial government is responsible for is healthcare and education.
Yes.
And he seems to really want to focus on the third that isn't.
Yes.
Which, is really problematic for municipalities that are trying to understand where to go, because the province can set direction, and they do, and sort of say, this is where we want you to go, and this is how high we want you to jump. Come with us, or tell us how you're going to do that, which is a fine approach. Sometimes they could take more leadership and sort of say, this is what you're going to do. Yeah. I've been sort of saying on the speed cameras issues, the province could have regulated exactly how much we were allowed to ding people for, when we could ding them, what areas we could get them, the hours, the rate of speeding. Like, really, if I had a chance to ask him, I would say, what are you comfortable with? Yeah. What do you find unacceptable? 20 over, 10 over, 15 over? Give me a number.
Yeah.
Right? And then if you're saying, okay, it's going to be 20. Okay. Can we have speed zones that are 40? So then can I ding people at 60? Right? Or can we have speed zones at 30 and ding people at 50? Right? You could have done that for the whole province.
There are 10,000 ways that people were willing to have nuanced discussions about, like, if the speed cameras were being used over aggressively in some municipalities.
Yeah, like Vaughan, who put 30,000 tickets in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Which is more than we did in the entire year.
Yeah. And like if that's happening, then there were tons of people who were willing to have that nuanced discussion. The only person who was not sits at the head of the cabinet table.
But also things around development, right? I mean, we kind of introduced development charges way back in the day in Hazel's time, and it was used as a tool by more and more municipalities to make up for budget deficits. And to support underfunding of downloading that we've gotten. Right, municipalities deliver way more social services than people realize. Responsible for homelessness, housing, emergency services, all of that. And now we're even getting into the realm of healthcare. Both Mississauga and Brampton have been required by the provincial government to put in hundreds of millions of dollars to build new hospitals, which, initially we took a pretty principled stance, which I agree with. This is a provincial jurisdiction. Why are we adding multiple percentages to the tax base for a hospital that should be completely funded by the provincial government, right? And then they yell at us for not, having balanced budgets and not and raising taxes too much.
Yeah, and this I think is one of the areas where I'm most sympathetic to municipalities where obviously these cases of like hospitals in Peel Region is maybe the most extreme version of that, but even something as basic as like in other provinces, it's the province that pays for the ambulances, right? And in Ontario, municipalities pay for ambulances. It's like
and half the paramedics.
Yeah,
half the paramedics are paid by the municipalities.
Yeah, and there is an enormous amount that we ask municipalities to pay for that in other jurisdictions, and frankly, in better functioning jurisdictions than Ontario, other levels of government carry those costs. And to go back to development charges, I'm most familiar with the city of Toronto, where I think things probably did get out of hand, are still out of hand, and the city of Toronto is looking at some really bleak numbers this year because of how much their budget relied on development charges coming in that are evaporating because the condo market is going kapooey. But the thing to remember was that development charges were kind of like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge bargain between cities and the province, where the province got to retreat from infrastructure grants that it had been funding through the 60s and 70s and 80s, and basically offloaded that cost to municipalities, saying, well, now you'll get developers to pay for the sewers and the highways and these things, and we can step back from that role, and we'll keep our taxes low, the provincial taxes lower than they need to be. And it was this kind of greasy handshake, if I can put it that way, between the province and municipalities. And back when a development charge might be like $1,000 a unit in today's money, I'm sure some developer back in 1988 was screaming bloody murder about that, but it's not the end of the world. But when you get to $150,000 a unit, when it is simply not possible for a developer to so much as stick a single nail in a single 2x4 without having first, quite aside from development charges, parkland dedications, and then the whole bevy of other fees. When it's a $250,000 threshold of paperwork and taxes and fees before you can even start the first step in construction, kiss affordability goodbye, right? And I think municipalities like Mississauga and others around the province are getting there eventually, but it's still not as widespread as it ought to be.
No, and we had a housing task force to try and challenge this. We've halved the DCs in the city. We've also incentivized rental, and if you have a 3-bedroom, we're essentially reducing your property taxes for the next 30 years. And so we've tried to do a whole number of things that we were expecting the province to then sort of say, this is a good example, let's try to replicate this in other cities, but they haven't done that. I mean, part of our frustration is the amount of sort of direction and then lack of follow through, right? Or even a reversal. Yeah. At one point, a few years ago, the provinces all got together and said, we're going to develop green development standards, which are going to future-proof, be more efficient, and be more environmentally friendly. And each province kind of had their own sort of group of standards. The provincial government in Ontario decided to just let every municipality figure it out even further. So then you had a more disparate set of regulations that made it harder for developers. And then recently, in one of the most recent bills introduced, they just removed them again altogether.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like speed cameras too, where they introduced the regulations and then backtracked on it completely.
Yeah, that Toronto Green Standard fight is a weird one, because the City of Toronto's position is that basically the law doesn't do what the province says it does, and that they're going to keep enforcing the Green Standard. The minister has written Toronto a letter saying no, sorry, it was the deputy minister wrote a letter saying no, we mean what we say. And so this is one of these things that is going to go to court, and I cannot imagine how Toronto thinks it's going to win this fight, because best case scenario is the province passes a new bill as part of they've already, they have to pass these kinds of bills every few months anyway. They're just going to tack this onto a bill that has to pass, saying no, really, the Toronto Green Standard is dead. No,
I mean, at the end of the day, we know the legislation is going to eventually trump whatever objection we might have, whether it's reducing the number of councillors or amalgamating cities or removing these things. I think we just find it somewhat exhausting from time to time when we know some of these ideas are put up as trial balloons. This government seems to enjoy suggesting things and then sort of seeking public feedback. And then every issue becomes a campaign, becomes a fight, becomes, okay, now I got to spend the next 6 to 8 weeks talking about speed cameras as opposed to what I was working on in terms of housing policy or whatever it was, right? And so that's the frustrating part. And, I've talked to the Premier a couple of times about, I don't really think this makes sense. He seems to receive the information, but on certain things, it's just his mind's made up. This is not what he wants to do.
Yeah, and I'm of two minds on this one, because, I wrote, a while back now, that, the constant whipsawing of housing policy in Ontario was very clearly, you could just see from statements from AMO and other large city mayors that the whipsawing of housing policy was actually starting to obstruct the overall goal of getting more housing built, because nobody knew what the policy was going to be in 18 months. And so developers were actually pulling back, being we don't know what to plan for.
Yeah.
And I think some of that is still true in some places. And so, before the most recent election, I think I was saying to some opposition members of multiple parties. I'm not out here giving partisan advice to people, but I was referring to the UK election, where it has not actually come out in the event as it looked like, but there was some leaking from the UK government back when the Labour government had just been elected, that they were going to move really, really hard on housing in the first year, because they understood that the housing system is so slow that you have to start early and fast just to get any kind of change in policy to actually be visible by the time you're running for re-election. But they also understood that you can't get the results you want by, doing 25% in year one, 25% in year two, 25, right? You people need to be able to plan based on the policy. So your best bet is to go really big early on, and then give people the stability of saying, okay, yes, it's a big change, but these are the rules, and these are what the rules are going to be for the next 4 years. And as I say, that was sort of what was leaking out of Westminster in the UK, and then it ended up not actually being what they ended up doing. But I still think it's probably a valid strategy for this government if they want, or the next government.
Well, I will say, the Premier, Doug Ford, has an uncanny ability to capture people's attention.
Yes.
To talk about issues that almost everyone has an opinion on, and it's almost immediate whenever he brings it up, right? People like talking about what he talks about. And I wonder what the opposition parties can do. I reflect on the fact that the first time we met, you were interviewing me while I was running for leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. I think that was in 2019. Yeah. Probably one of the first interviews that I had done in that process, because I guess it was kind of the niche fringe candidate that I was, sort of talking about issues that
You were not heavily favored to win that
no,
contest.
no. And I was talking about certain things that people didn't want
Yes.
to touch, like, Catholic school funding
Yes.
and universal basic income and childcare and things like that. So, but we've known each other since then. And you've covered these other parties, and you saw recently both opposition leader parties kind of take a swipe at their leaders.
Yes.
I don't think Andrea Horwath got anywhere near low 70s when she was leader. I think it was almost always in the 80s. Merritt Stiles only got, I think it was high 60s,
Yeah,
68.
Yeah.
And then obviously Bonnie Cromie only getting 57%. Despite getting party status, 30% of the vote, and then on Merritt's side, still being the official opposition and being focused. I guess what do you think these parties can do to take on someone like Doug Ford, whose populist message has resonated so well with Ontarians?
Before I answer that, if I can, I want to say just a quick story. You mentioned Doug Ford's ability to drive attention. And in 2018, after they won the election, we had already done a season of what is now the On Poly podcast. We were calling it, I think, the Agenda on Politics back then.
Okay.
And we'd done this season, and we were trying to figure out what our next season would be. And I said to my then manager, basically, Doug Ford is going to drive an incredible amount of attention to provincial politics among people who have never paid attention to provincial politics before.
Yeah.
I watched this happen at Toronto City Hall. It will happen again. And we at TVO are kind of perfectly positioned to play the role of Queen's Park concierge, right? Or like maitre d', like, hi, welcome, bathrooms are on the left, coat check is on the right. We're going to show you how things work.
Yeah.
And that became sort of my my guiding star for that first year of the Ford government. I can write antagonistic things when I want to, but often I'm just saying, like, okay, this is the machinery at work, and this is what it's doing, and this is why you need to understand that. And as it turned out, about 18 months into the Ford government, that we got a global pandemic where suddenly it was really, really, really important for everybody to understand the nitty gritty of how healthcare policy works and what that means to you in the real world. So in that sense, we were very well positioned. Sorry, that is all of a bit of a digression, but it's a story I like telling. In terms of what the opposition parties can do, we were speaking a bit off camera earlier about, it's very important for the Liberals that they have now reached official party status or recognized party status. They are going to just be able to command more attention now than they could even as a caucus of nominal independents. And they were doing good work in terms of getting that attention prior to this most recent election. I think Mike Schreiner is a case of somebody who, he is still not formally a leader of a recognized party, but Mike Schreiner, punches above his weight in terms of the attention that he commands at Queen's Park. In terms of how... I don't think the answer is necessarily, trying to defeat Doug Ford's populism, right? Some of this is necessarily going to be figuring out how to dress, New Democrat and Liberal sentiments in a little bit, at least, populist costume. This whole populist moment that we are going through in Western politics, it might not have started exactly with Rob Ford, but if you want to talk about, what else was going on in 2010, right? Like the Tea Party protests in the U.S. and, the rise of more populist conservative politics in lots of other countries. 2010 was a big year for that. And it's not going away, right? It's 15 years now. This form of populism, look at who's the president of the United States right now, or don't. But the populism is not going away, and I think progressives will end up having to adopt more populist positions. I think of, somebody like Zoran Mamdani in New York City. People can agree or disagree with some of the policies that he is proposing, but I don't think he's commanding the attention that he is because of his policy proposals. I think he is coming through. He has found a way to speak to voters in a way that is really, really appropriate for the media that he is using. Right? He is able to speak in those TikTok clips in a way, and I don't at all mean for this to sound like I'm condescending to TikTok or whatever, but like he's incredibly good at just getting a short, sharp message in within the confines of short vertical video, right? But can also do like sit down long form interviews as well, right? The vast majority of politicians are not Zoran Mamdani. They are not Barack Obama. But I think in Ontario, the opposition parties are going to need to find ways to to speak through that medium in that way. Obviously, this takes a different flavor because, of course, the Liberals now have to look for a new leader as well. Again, yes, after 2 years. And, that's going to be a question that they are going to have to answer in their leadership process, right? It is not just... so much of the last leadership race was, about this question of like, had the party gone too far to the left? Could Bonnie Crombie bring it, back to the center or to the right? And, that's, a debate that I think the party is always going to have. But I think they also need to have a discussion about, or rather, they need to look for the leader who can speak most authentically in the current environment, in the current media environment. Now, I don't think for the Ontario Liberal Party that's going to necessarily look like Zoran Mamdani, but you could do worse than to aim for that direction, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of political pundits and parties, especially Liberals and progressives like New Democrats, they look at branding as potentially the solution, where it's much more than that, right? Yeah. What are people talking about? What are their concerns? How do we address them? We're trying to do that here. When I ran for mayor, we tried to address that, especially the affordability. Go to where people are and what are they talking about? What are they concerned about? And then find a way to connect with them, right? And in a landscape where we didn't have our own media, we had to do our own. Yeah. And I think that's why we were reasonably successful. Obviously, we didn't win, but reasonably successful in getting to that sort of point that people were trying to feel heard. Yeah. And to see somebody trying to do something about it, which clearly is something that this premier is good at doing too. So,
are you going to run for the Ontario Liberal leadership?
I'm interviewing you here, so no, absolutely not. I will not be running for leader of the Ontario Liberal Party again.
All right.
So we can put that on the record. But I am going to be interested to see who it is and what they have in terms of an idea for municipalities. Obviously, I worked closely with Bonnie Crombie. She was the mayor here, and we talked quite a bit about how we can have a new deal for municipalities if they were successful. Obviously, they weren't, but municipalities do need, I think, a lot more attention in terms of how the province can enable them to succeed because. They're creatures of the province, but they have such a huge, important mandate. 60% of all the infrastructure that's public infrastructure is municipal infrastructure.
Absolutely, yeah.
Only 10 cents on the dollar is a municipal tax dollar. Yeah. And so the hoops that, the provincial and even the federal government get to make us jump through as opposed to giving us, the funding we need or the ability to fund the programs that we need to deliver is a real frustration. I think every other province in Canada directly funds transit operations. Ontario doesn't, right? And they like big shiny announcements and big new cars, but if these things aren't happening, if it takes 10, 15 years, the system is broken. And I'd like more party leaders, politicians, the Ontario government to pay attention to that because we can't function with the way things are right now.
Yeah, as I said earlier, this is, one of the areas that I am very sympathetic to municipalities. The other thing that the province could do, and nobody has functionally reversed, I will give the McGuinty and Wynne government some credit. They at the margins, they did reverse some of the downloading to municipalities, but functionally, we still live in Mike Harris's Ontario, and it's worth having a discussion. And we always talk about, oh well, we'll have a new panel, like a who does what panel. But the other option, if for whatever reason the province can't stomach the idea of handing municipalities different forms of tax revenue, like a percent of the HST, that kind of thing, well then let's talk about what costs we can take away from municipalities,
What
right?
can
We
we
mentioned
upload?
ambulances earlier, but I'm not entirely convinced that municipalities should be paying for policing. We mentioned transit operations, right? I mean, if you took the cost of policing and transit operations out of the budgets of big cities, you guys wouldn't need to raise taxes again for the rest of my lifetime.
Yeah.
Right. Obviously I'm overstating things slightly, but even in more rural and northern municipalities, right, they're still dealing with provincial highways that were downloaded to them a generation ago, that they're handling the costs for. That these are not places that they have got the tax base for that. So, I think, if we don't have the stomach for giving municipalities new revenues, then we should at least be honest and take away some of those costs if we can.
So, JMM, this has been fantastic. I really enjoy being able to ask the questions of you this time. Big fan.
I got one in.
Yes, you did. I'm a big fan of the On Poly podcast. I think I would encourage everybody to listen or to watch it. I do want to ask a couple of quick personal questions for you just before we go. Really, let's talk about your journey at TVO. What's been some of the highlights for you there?
It was not a highlight in terms of enjoying it, but covering the pandemic, covering the provincial response to COVID-19 is probably, knock on wood, probably the most important journalism I'm ever going to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think I did that relatively well. I think I was useful. And so that, like I said, I didn't enjoy it, but I think it's the most important work I've done.
In your time, you've kind of, evolved from more of a writer, reporter to being more in front of the camera.
Yes.
You don't always seem 100% comfortable with that. How's it been?
Well, no, I never took any broadcast training. But you work at a TV station for a decade, and eventually they put you in front of a camera. It's been a change. It's been a transformation. I really did think that I was going to live and die with just hunched behind a keyboard, tapping away, writing. Writing is still. I still think of myself as a writer. I still think it's the way I'm sort of most comfortable communicating. But the plus side to being a TVO is that I get to work with Steve Pakin, who is, of course, a very...
well, he says he's kind of semi-retiring.
Yes,
How's
well,
that
but he
out?
continues to do the podcast with me, and I'm not buttering Steve up here. I genuinely have learned so much from working with him, and have learned how to work on camera, right? It's difficult to explain to people just stuff about, and I maybe actually haven't done a great job of it during this podcast, but using your voice and I have a makeup call. It's getting used to stuff like that is it is very different, having come from exclusively being a writer, but it's also, it has been a ton of fun, right? The podcast does reasonably well for what is, if we're honest, kind of a niche topic, right? Not a ton of Ontario politics content out there. But I've started getting recognized on the street when I walk my dog. So yeah, that is, my wife laughs about this, but yes, it's going well, but yeah, it was a certainly at the beginning, it was very rocky.
Steve's interviewed me on camera quite a few times.
Yes.
And he always gives me space to sort of elaborate, and he wants to get into the weeds, which I really like, because you're not talking in sound bites necessarily. You do have sort of the space to elaborate, and then he always has a pretty good follow up that kind of catches you off guard sometimes, and it's like, okay, I hadn't thought of that, but I'm going to give you an honest answer because I don't have a pre-formulated one. What was your first on camera interview like with Steve when you guys worked together?
So actually, the very first time I was on camera with Steve would have been I did an appearance on The Agenda before I worked at TVO, and amusingly, one of the it was the standard kind of formula of like a conservative, a liberal, a New Democrat, and a journalist on the panel. I was the journalist, and Marit Stiles was the New Democrat. She was not yet an MPP, much less the NDP leader. But more relevant to this, I guess when we started that the podcast that would become On Poly, as I say, we did that first season that sort of led up to the 2018 election, and Steve was not initially part of the podcast, and then we decided, like it's a waste of this incredible asset that Steve is to not bring him in some way. And so we started working together on that. That was when we really started working together much more closely. Yeah. One funny story, I think it's funny. When I started at TVO, I was really convinced that it was important for me, despite the fact that I don't work directly on The Agenda, I believed that it was really important that I know what was on the agenda every night when I come into work. So like I was always listening to The Agenda's podcast on my way into work at like 1.5 or double speed so that I could get it done. And it was like I knew what was on the show when I walked in the door at TVO. And for the first few weeks at TVO, I didn't bump into Steve, and I didn't get introduced to him or whatever. And so eventually I am, in fact, introduced to Steve. He says, "Oh, hi, my name's Steve Pakin." I say, "Yeah, Steve, I know who you are." But he's being very polite, and he's talking to me. And for just a moment, I'm looking at him going, "Why are you talking so slowly?" And I'm used to hearing him on double speed.
I listen to you guys too on 1.5, 2x.
Yeah.
That's just how I get through my podcast. I mean, you gotta, if you had an unlimited budget and you could have a dream documentary that you could run onto TVO, what would it be about?
Oh, gosh. My first love, before politics, before before video games, before even my wife and child, my first love is science fiction, and also like the history of like space exploration and space technology, right? I'm the kind of person who's always sort of resented that I wasn't born in time for the Apollo program, right? Yeah. And so, if I had an unlimited budget to do a documentary about the Apollo program, or if I'm honest, like I've always kind of had like a weird interest in the Soviet space program, everything from like the first man in space, Yuri Gagarin, to up to like the Mir space station. A documentary about that I think would be pretty cool.
This is going to come full circle to Star Trek, Star Wars, which I just said we weren't going to do. But fun fact, do you know Lucille Ball from I Love Lucy?
Yes.
She was, obviously very popular in her time, and she wanted to invest in interesting projects. Yeah. And she invested in Star Trek when it was kind of floundering because of the amount of diversity and representation that the show represented, and essentially saved it and kept it going.
Yeah, and so there are some of, I think, I actually have not watched the series. I'm going through a bit of a rewatch right now, but certainly when I used to watch it as a kid on TV, at the end of the credits, you would sometimes see a Desilu credit. So
which is fascinating to me. So thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having
InCamera
me.
Here in Mississauga.
Absolutely.
And everybody should tune in and listen to the On Poly podcast over at TVO or wherever you find your podcasts. And we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, JMM.